Find the derivative of y equals 1 over the square root of tangent t, then evaluate y prime of pi over 4. Y here is made up of a 1 over square root of an entire expression, tangent of t. Since I have a root involved, I'm going to want to rewrite this with a fractional exponent, so 1 over tangent t to the first power and square root, or second root, so it's to the 1/2. Since the numerator here is a constant, we can move this expression from the denominator to the numerator with a negative exponent, multiplying that 1, so it will be tangent of t raised to the negative 1/2. Since the outer function here is the power, the trig is inside of that power, when we work out the derivative, the first rule will be the power rule. The derivative, y prime, which can also be called dy dt here, will be a power rule, bring down the negative 1/2, leave the inside alone exactly as we see it, subtract 1 from the power, so minus 2/2, and then the derivative of the inside of the power, which is the tangent of t, the derivative of tangent of t will be secant squared of t to complete the chain rule. Now let's take some steps to rewrite this. We have a negative 1/2 tangent t to the minus 1 minus 2, negative 3 over 2, times the secant squared of t. Since we have a negative exponent, we're going to move that to the denominator. It'll move down with the 2 that's already in the denominator and write it as a positive exponent. The numerator will be left as a negative 1 times secant squared, so a negative secant squared of t over tangent t to the 3/2. This can also be written as negative secant squared of t tangent 3/2 of t. That means the same thing. The next step is to evaluate y prime of pi over 4. That means to plug in a pi over 4 for each of the t's, and that will give me negative secant squared of pi over 4 over tangent to 3/2 of pi over 4. The powers on these trig functions mean to take the trig function first and then raise it to the power, so this will be negative secant of pi over 4 quantity squared over tangent of pi over 4 quantity to the 3/2. The secant is 1 over the cosine, or the reciprocal of cosine. The cosine of pi over 4 is root 2 over 2. The secant will be the reciprocal of that, or 2 over root 2. And then we have that entire thing squared, since it was secant squared. All divided by the tangent of pi over 4, which is the sine of pi over 4 over the cosine of pi over 4. The sine of pi over 4 is root 2 over 2. The cosine of pi over 4 is also root 2 over 2. All this will be to the 3/2. But the root 2 over 2's can cancel, and that leaves us with just a 1. So we have a negative, we're going to square that numerator. 2 squared is 4. Root 2 squared is a 2. And all this is over 1 to 3/2. Now 4 divided by 2 is a 2. 1 to the 3/2 square root of 1 and then cube, 1 raised to any power, comes out to a 1. Square root of 1 is 1, cube it is still 1. We have negative 2 over 1. Any number over 1 is itself, and it comes out to a negative 2.